This is Parjanya of the Department of English, Sonada Degree College, Darjeeling. And this lecture is being made available to you by Radio Salesian 90.8 FM. And today I'm going to be talking about one of the poems in your syllabus, Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. And this lecture is intended for the 4th semester English Honors students. And you have this as part of your syllabus, okay? Now, before we come to the poem itself, Goblin Market is a long narrative poem, and it has been, over the decades, it has been subject to various different kinds of interpretations. But before we come to the poem itself, let me talk a bit about the poet, that is Christina Rossetti. Her full name is Christina Georgina Rossetti. Her dates are 1830 to 1894. And she belongs to the PreRaphaelite school or the PreRaphaelite brotherhood. Now, who were the PreRaphaelites? The PreRaphaelites were a group of poets and painters, primarily painters writing in Victorian England, and they were sort of protesting against the mannerist forms of art that were espoused by the likes of Raphael and Michelangelo. So that's where the name comes from. Pre-Raphaelite, prior to Raphael, okay, before Raphael. And they were going back to the classical models, the classical forms of Quattrocento Italian art, and they paid meticulous attention, particularly in their painting, they paid meticulous attention to detail, okay, also in their poetry. And famous poets and painters belonging to the Pre-Raphaelite brotherhood or the Pre-Raphaelite school include Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Dante Gabriel is Christina's brother, and others are William Holman Hunt and his wife Leigh Hunt, John Everett Millais, James Collinson, etc. Okay. Now, Christina belonged to a family of 5. As I've already mentioned, her brother was Dante Gabriel, and he is, of course, the more famous poet and painter. But then again, Christina Rossetti, although her oeuvre is not very big, she's very famous for her poem Goblin Market. Okay. Now, Christina had a very cloistered childhood. Okay, in the sense that she was educated largely at home, and her father, Gabriel Rossetti, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and he had to quit his job, and the mother had to work as a governess and as a tutor in order to fend for the family. And then Christina at the tender age of 14, she herself was given to terrible bouts of depression. Okay, she rejected 3 suitors in her life. She rejected 3 proposals of marriage, and the first proposal of marriage came from James Collinson, who was, as I've mentioned, who was a Pre-Raphaelite poet and painter himself and a friend of her brother's. Okay. Now, Christina also modeled for many of her brother's paintings, for Dante Gabriel's paintings. In particular, the paintings, the famous paintings for which she modeled are The Girlhood of Virgin Mary. This is an 1848 painting by Dante Gabriel. You can Google and look up this painting. And Christina serves as the model for Mary, Virgin Mary, in this painting. There's another painting, 1850, also by Dante Gabriel, called, the Latin name is Ecce Ancilla Domini. The English translation would be Behold the Handmaid of the Lord. Okay, once again, Christina here is modeling as Virgin Mary. And once again, you can Google and look this up as well. If you see this, if you analyze these sort of visuals, these paintings carefully, you will see that Christina is shown as a very slender, she was very thin as it is, she's a very slender figure and sort of withdrawn and coy and shy, as if she's almost afraid of something, you know. And this kind of cloistered sensibility, this is important because this becomes when you look at the poem Goblin Market, you will see how this whole idea of cloisteredness, of a certain claustrophobia, of being shy of the outside world, of the masculine outside world, this is one of the major dominant themes which we also see in the poem Goblin Market. Now, what is the poem Goblin Market about? The poem itself was written in 1862, and it is about 2 sisters, Laura and Lizzie. Okay, now these 2 sisters, very much like Christina herself, they have a cloistered life. Okay, they live a sheltered life, and the outside world is the world of the Goblin Men. Now, the Goblin Men are described as evil creatures, okay, who come to sell their fruit. Okay, and there are of course biblical suggestions here. The fruit may refer, there is a suggestion of the fruit being the fruit of the forbidden tree. If you go back to the story from the Bible and the story of Adam and Eve, God had forbidden Adam and Eve to eat the fruit of the forbidden tree, and of course they were tempted by Satan into eating the fruit, and then they were thrown out of Eden or paradise. Okay, the fruit, the forbidden fruit, also is represents sexual knowledge. It's the fruit of knowledge. It's also the fruit of sexual knowledge. Yeah. So there is a contrast here between the worlds of innocence and the and experience. So whereas the world of the two sisters, it sort of resembles a world of innocence, the outside world, the world of the market, and there are again suggestions of the capitalist market here. Since Rossetti is writing in Victorian England, there are of course suggestions of capitalism and a sort of market economies coming in here. The outside world, the quote-unquote male masculine world, the world of capitalism, the world of the market, is seen as the world of experience. Now, coming to the Goblin Men themselves, sort of they are representative of not just of the outside world, but of a certain evil. And what is this evil? We'll just be discussing it. In my next lecture, I'll of course divide this lecture into several parts, and I'll be analyzing the poem in greater detail. So what happens basically in this poem, you see that these two sisters, they're living by themselves, and Laura is tempted by the calls of the Goblin Men, and Lizzie warns her not to go out, not to hear the calls of the Goblin Men, and not to respond to their calls. But Laura, who is tempted by the Goblin Men, she goes out and she is tempted by the Goblin Men, and they offer her their fruit. Okay, once again, the fruit of the forbidden tree, the sexual fruit, the fruit bearing the sexual knowledge. Okay, and Laura doesn't have any money on her, so she trades a golden curl, a lock of her golden hair, in return for the fruit. And once again, hair is itself a suggestion. There's a sexual suggestion here. Remember, Christina Rossetti is writing in the Victorian times. Okay, so this is also a time of very rigid and conservative social mores. Okay, so a lot of the sexual imagery, a lot of the her ideas about patriarchy, about feminism, about sexuality, they are present as undercurrents in this poem. They're never directly mentioned in the poem, but you know, when you read through the poem, of course there are undertones of all of this, because she's writing in the Victorian age. So Laura, she trades a lock of her golden hair, and she is given the fruit by the Goblin Men, and she eats this fruit. Now once she comes back home, she is taken ill, and then she begins to be wasted away. And no matter what Lizzie does, Lizzie just cannot seem to help her sister recover. Okay, the suggestion here of course is that once again that Laura has entered the world of experience. Laura has entered the outside world, also the world of sexual knowledge, the world of men, the big bad world of men. And once again, I told you about the paintings where Christina is modeling for her brother Dante Gabriel, and Christina, you see her figure almost like a sly, a shy, very coy and shy figure, and a very withdrawn sort of figure. I mean, she's the model for Virgin Mary, and you see that when Laura is almost someone similar, and she goes out and she's tempted by these men. She's tempted into, you know, sort of, they're making sexual advances at her, and all this is of course not very direct, but very subtly communicated to you. And once she has that experience, she's destroyed by it, she's burnt by it, and then she begins to be wasted away, and she begins to wither and die. Now Lizzie, in an attempt to save her sister, she decides to go out and meet this Goblin Men. At first, when she meets the Goblin Men, they once again tempt her with their fruit. Okay, but Lizzie, she is the model of chastity here. She is pure and she refuses to give in to their advances. That is when they force her to eat the fruit. Okay, and she does not open her mouth, and they force her, they shove the fruit in her mouth, and the fruit sort of breaks, and the juice and the pulp, it drenches her. Okay, and once again there are undertones of rape here. It's not directly communicated to you, but there are undertones of rape here. Then Lizzie returns back home. She's drenched with the juice of the fruit. Laura goes out there and she licks the juice off the body of her sister, and then she recovers, and the poem ends with the two sisters. Much later, the two sisters are now mothers, and they are telling their children how to stay away from these Goblin Men. Okay, now As I told you, there are several suggestions here. One is, of course, the idea that the world of male sexuality is not a good world, and the world of sisterly love is a higher ideal of love. Once again, there are also suggestions of lesbianism here, because when Lizzie comes back and Laura licks the juices of the body of her sister, she's saved by it, she's redeemed by it. So the idea of sisterly bond, of sisterly love, also the idea of lesbian love, if I may so put it across in that fashion, it's projected as a higher ideal than the masculine love, or the world of experience, the world of masculine love. So in a way, this poem is also criticizing patriarchy. It's criticizing patriarchy by projecting the world of masculine love as something negative. It's the big bad world of the goblins. And only when Lizzie comes back, she is a model of chastity. She refuses to give in to these men. She comes back, and the world of sisterly love is seen as redemptive. Okay. Another possible interpretation of the poem is biblical interpretation, which goes back to the whole tradition of Eucharism within the Roman Catholic Church. Now, what is Eucharism? During the Last Supper, Christ had mentioned that to his followers, of course, that they were to partake of blood and wine. Okay, and then Christ had gone to the cross and he offered himself as sacrifice in order to redeem man of his first sin. Now, what is the first sin? Man and woman disobeying God and eating the forbidden fruit. Okay, so Christ had crucified, he had been crucified, he had gone to the cross in order to redeem mankind. Okay, so this is Christ the Redeemer here, and when within the Roman Catholic tradition, when you partake of the wine and the bread, you're basically sort of partaking allegorically, of course, of the flesh and blood of Christ. Now, what is the suggestion here? Lizzie is a Christ-like figure, and she is giving her own body, she's putting her own body up as sacrifice for her sister Laura. And Laura, by consuming from her sister body, she's being redeemed, she's being saved, she's being brought back from the point of death. So there are also references. As I told you, this poem has been subject to multiple sort of interpretations. The feminist critique German Greer has analyzed the poem, and I'll be talking about German Greer and her analysis of the poem in my next lecture. So this poem has been subject to various interpretations. There are, of course, it is a poem that is it's written in almost a fairy tale kind of way. It's a long narrative poem, but there are, of course, undertones, sexual undertones, biblical undertones of homoeroticism and lesbianism. So you need to keep all of these in mind when you are going through the poem Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. Okay. So in my next lecture, I'll be talking about, I of course may not be able to read the whole poem with you, but I'll be focusing on certain sections of the poem, and I'll be offering you the different possible interpretations that these sections might hold. Okay, thank you so much.